All right, we've got a great workshop for you today from Michele, Résumé Rescue. So, great workforce content for the students that you're working with. And if we want to go, I'll let Michele talk to you more about that. What I want to talk to you about is kind of how to participate for those of you who haven't attended one of our webinars before. We don't have a lot of rules, but we have kind of two that are really important. One is we ask that you use the chat room to do things like introduce yourselves, share links and resources with the group. It's where, as Michele's going through her presentation, Danielle's going to be posting a lot of links to resources that Michele is mentioning. And if you want to ask questions of the group or kind of share your insights, things that you do in your own classrooms, you can post those there. If you have questions for Michele, we're going to ask that instead of posting those in the chat, you use the Q&A feature. It's that little button on the bottom with two dialogue bubbles, and it says Q&A. And the reason we ask you to do that is that allows us to track which questions have been asked and answered, so that we make sure that everybody's question gets answered by the end of the webinar and makes it to the recording. So if you do that for us, that would be great. Next slide. We always get this question. We are recording. So within the week, usually within a couple of days, you'll get a follow-up email. That email is going to have a link to the webinar recording. It's going to have a link to Michele's slideshow, which she's going to share the slideshow that she's using today. She's also going to include a summary sheet of kind of her key points, key takeaways from the webinar. That's really nice to share with other teachers in your program. We'll also include a transcript of the chat, the Q&A. You guys will get a certificate, and we'll include information about scholarships and individual memberships to Pro Literacy. And I'll talk a little bit about those things in a minute. You're going to get a separate email with links to sign up for coaching sessions, small group coaching sessions. And you see the dates there. Links are going to be in the slideshow, but they're also going to be in the second email that you get. We can go to the next slide. So for those of you who haven't participated in the small group coaching sessions, this is something that we added into our traditional webinars for the Teacher Training Plus project. The goal behind it is really to help folks. We know that you attend a lot of webinars or workshops. A lot of times we get back home, we're trying to implement the things that Michele's going to talk to us about, and we realize maybe there's something that we're unsure of, or maybe we understood what she was talking about, but our situation is a little bit different. We don't know how to adapt the strategies she gave us to our particular situation. This is where those small group coaching sessions come in handy. Pick one of those dates that works for you. You sign up. There might be 3 or 4, up to 12 participants in that group. You get a chance to ask your question to Michele. Michele's going to share some of her insights with you, coach you up, get you ready to go back and use some of those strategies. Probably some of those other people attending the coaching session might share ideas and resources as well. So it's just an opportunity to get a little bit more kind of mentoring to help you get started, or if you've already tried to implement some of the strategies Michele's talking about, and then that attempt generated some questions, you can come in and ask Michele what you should do next. Okay, next slide. All right, those additional resources that we talked about, scholarships. So, excuse me, in some of the workshops that we talk about instructional resources that the presenter or other people attending the webinar have used. They might get posted in the chat. If any of those are materials published by New Readers Press, they're materials that you haven't tried out before, you can apply for a $1,000 scholarship. And it's just enough money to get a classroom set of maybe some workforce materials that we have from New Readers Press that you're kind of intrigued about after Michele gets done with her webinar. Give you a chance to try those out with your students. without investing your own program's money. Um, we do have a limited number of scholarships available. I think it's 60. So, and I'm not sure how many we've given out yet, but if you want to take advantage of that, I would encourage you to click on that link. Danielle will post it in the chat. Click on that link, not now because we want to pay attention to Michele, but when you get that follow-up email. The other thing is we're giving everybody that's participating in the Teacher Training Plus webinars a free individual membership to Pro Literacy. Now, there's a lot of great reasons to belong to Pro Literacy, but two of them are, one, if you are unfamiliar with our education network, it's kind of our resource hub. The vast majority of the materials on Education Network are free and available to everybody. There are some that have a fee. Usually when they have a fee, they're free to members. So having that individual membership gives you access to all of the resources. Second reason, it gives you access to the membership central area, which has archives of our notebook. Notebook is our member publication, comes out 3 times a year. It's specifically for tutors and teachers, has lots of lesson plans, teaching strategies, resources. So that entire archive is available to you if you're an individual member. So you got a link there in the chat. You'll get a link in your follow-up email. Encourage you to sign up for that individual membership. And Michele, I think that's all of the information I have to share. So I'll let you introduce yourself. I'll turn things over to you. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Todd. And hello, everyone. Welcome. I am glad to have you here today with us as we explore ways that we can be teaching resume writing to our learners. My name is Michele Vick, and I am an instructional consultant at Texas A&M University, where I work with international students. I have over 15 years teaching ESL, both overseas and here in the United States, and several years of experience also training instructors in teaching methodology and things related to ed tech and digital tools and digital literacy. And one of the things that I bring to this workplace training is that over the last few years, I developed a course that was specifically targeting internationally trained professionals. So those are those people who enter the US and they already have a degree, a certification, a skill set from outside of the US and are looking for, how do I get integrated into the workforce in the United States? And that it requires a combination of giving them some language skills, but also giving them the skills to know how they search for jobs here, apply for jobs here, present themselves well, help employers see what they have to offer in terms of the training and the skills and the experience they bring from outside of the United States. All right, so let's look at what we're going to hopefully accomplish today. First of all, we're going to spend some time really looking at learners' needs and identify what are the key learners' needs related to learning to write a resume. And so I want you, as we go through those, to be thinking about your own learners and thinking through which ones of these that Michele's mentioning do I think my learners really struggle with. And then I think by the end of today, you'll be able to recognize and select some scaffolded instructional approaches that you want to take back to your own learners and your own classes that you teach. We're going to explore and evaluate some online learning resources. You'll get some links to some, but we're going to really highlight a couple. And then I want you to understand the pitfalls, but also the potential of generative AI for resume writing assistance and how you might be leading your learners through possibly using generative AI to work on their resumes. I also want you to come to a coaching session. So we have 6 of those in the coming weeks. They're an hour at a time, and I hope you'll drop in for at least one of those, but feel free to drop in for more than one. And by the end of each of these coaching sessions, I hope that all participants will be ready to choose the online resources that best target their individual learners' needs. So we'll explore some of those resources and talk about the learners that you have in your own classes and what might work best with them. And then I also hope that participants will be able to write basic resume related prompts in using ChatGPT. So we might like get on ChatGPT and practice that together in these coaching sessions. And then the other thing is participants will have participated in collaborative idea and resource sharing with one another. So these coaching sessions, I don't come with like some sort of like outline of everything I'm going to teach or train you in, but you come with your ideas and your questions and I'll come too, and we'll like work together to brainstorm ideas and solutions. And that will involve you maybe sharing what's worked for you as well, or some other resources that you've found that were helpful or ideas that you have, and we'll all learn from one another. Okay, so let's dive in. And my first question comes from some experience. And that question is, do your students know, and maybe do you know, what hiring managers are looking for? And the reason I'm starting with this question is that in that course that I was doing for internationally trained professionals, I was teaching resume writing skills, but then I got into a couple of other positions in my own employment where I started hiring people and looking through lots of resumes. And I can say through a number of different roles I've had over the last few years, I have probably reviewed more than 200 resumes and cover letters. And suddenly I've started to realize my approaches to teaching resume writing might need to change. And so I want to bring that to you guys today. And I want us to kind of think in a mindset of when someone is on the hiring side, what are they looking for? Well, I can tell you first off, they don't have a lot of time to look. So they're looking through a lot of resumes very quickly, and certain things need to stand out. The other thing is if it's a big company, they may be using a hiring matrix. And so they're looking to match certain things that are on their hiring matrix. That's factors that are important to them that are listed out in their job description with what they see on the resume. And it needs to be really clear. So we want to teach our learners to make it really clear. So sometimes that can feel overwhelming, and just teaching any kind of resume writing to our learners may feel overwhelming. In fact, writing our own resume might feel very overwhelming. And sometimes overwhelming can cause us to freeze because we might think, I don't know what the perfect resume is. I don't know what the perfect style or format, like what type of resume is the perfect resume for myself or for my learners to teach them. And this is where I go back to Voltaire, who said, perfect is the enemy of good. And there's even an article in Forbes that I like even better, that perfect is the enemy of done. Voltaire didn't say that, an article in Forbes did. But when we get paralyzed by the idea of I've got to get the resume just right, and it's got to be just the right format, and should I put a professional summary at the top, or should I put an objective, and should I make it a functional or chronological, and all those things, we can become our own worst enemy and our students' worst enemy because it paralyzes us and we don't actually teach anything and nothing actually gets done. So we're going to look today at what are just the simple basics that any resume should have, regardless of if it's perfect or what format we're using or anything like that. What are some simple basics that is going to make it stand out to those hiring managers? All right, so I did just pop open the chat box because I saw some things coming through, and thank you for that. And please feel free to write your questions in the Q&A portion here. And Danielle, please feel free to stop me if I need to address a question immediately. Okay, so we're going to start out today looking at learner considerations. And the first thing that we're going to talk about is just the general learner needs. And as I go through these, I want you to think about your own learners and which ones of these might really stand out with the group or the students you work with. First of all, Many learners have never seen a good example of a resume. Maybe it's like they're new to the workforce. Maybe they haven't come from a family situation where their parents were like writing and turning in resumes. There's so many reasons why they may have no clue what is a resume actually even supposed to look like. Often they are unaware that they should customize their resumes to specific jobs. So they may think, I write a resume once and then I just turn it in anywhere I go, regardless of what kind of job I'm looking for. They also often lack the vocabulary to describe their work history. And that's not just for English language learners, but any of our adult students, they may not have the phrasing to describe what they've done in the past, or they may not have a work history and they don't know how to create a resume that shows that they do have some valid, useful experiences, even if it wasn't paid work. They may be a GED learner and they don't know how to list their GED, whether it's in process or completed in the education portion of the resume. And Danielle's going to drop a link in the chat box. We're not going to look explicitly at how to do that today, but I did want to leave you with an article that has some good examples of that. So it's Danielle dropped that link into the chat box. And then they may require help with formatting, whether that's like the digital skills that are required to create a well-formatted resume, or just like the organizational kind of visualization of it, what it should look like and how it should be formatted and ordered. Then there's some like really common mistakes. And believe me, I said I've reviewed over 200 resumes probably over the last few years, and I've seen it all. So basic spelling or punctuation errors. There's an article that I have in the references. It's from the Sloan School of Management, MIT, that talks about spelling errors are the number one thing that hiring managers or people who are in a position to hire and we're looking at resumes said might bias them against the resume. So even to this day, that's a simple thing that could be fixed, and it's one of the things that stands out the most in a negative way. Disorganization. I'm going to talk about two things here. One, disorganization could be, it is really hard to figure out what is their current job, or have they actually finished school. Another way that it could be disorganized is there's not like parallelism, where like the bullet points are, each bullet point is similarly structured, so it looks really messy, and you kind of get lost trying to figure out what they've actually done in their jobs. Another one is that it's unclear what their past job duties were, and that might not be because of the disorganization or the lack of parallelism, like with each bullet point starting with a past tense verb or something like that, but it may just be that they didn't list it very clearly, and so you see like some job title, but you don't actually know what they did. This is a big one, that there is an unclear link between the job that they're applying for and their work or education history. You want to make sure, again, that those resumes are customized and it's clear how this person is qualified for the job they're applying for, why it makes sense that they would be applying for it. Also, that there's no indication that they have the sought after skills or knowledge for that job. So sometimes I would be reviewing a resume and there's nothing that tells me that they know anything about using, say, Microsoft Word, and that's a big part of the job that I'm hiring for. And most likely they do know Microsoft Word, especially like if they gave me like a typed up resume, but I need it to be really, really clear. And so teaching our learners how to make it very clear that they have skills or knowledge that is required for the job that they're applying for. And then careless use of templates. So I don't know how many resumes I've looked at where they used a template and then they forgot to delete all the parts of the template that they didn't actually end up using. And so I got to like page 2 or page 3, and there's all this extra stuff that has nothing to do with them that they just left in there because they forgot to remove it. And that like shouts, I don't have an attention to detail, and that's not who you want to hire. And then obvious overuse of generative AI. And we'll go into this a little bit more in length. We're going to have a whole section towards the end of today's webinar on generative AI, and we're going to talk about some of the pitfalls. There are also some cultural differences, especially if you're working with people who've come from outside of the US. I've lived outside the US and I have submitted resumes or CVs, we're going to talk about that one in a second, outside of the US. And the way that those are structured or the information that's included in those can be really different. And if a person brings what they were trained to do into the US and then submits it here, it could cause some problems. So first off, personal details. It is standard in many areas of the world to include your birth date, like the year you were born, month, date, day, year, your marital status, the number of children you have, your nationality, and a photo of yourself. Most of these things are not we should discourage them from including those on resumes in the US. For one thing, hiring managers are trying to be as unbiased as possible. And things like age or number of children or nationality or the way someone looks, those can, whether a hiring manager wants to be biased or not, they can lead to biased decision making. And so it's really encouraged in the US that you don't include any of those, and your students need direct instruction about this and maybe a little convincing that they shouldn't include this, because it's probably been hardwired into them in their training outside of the US to include those. Another difference is CV versus resume. And I do have a short article that Danielle will put the link to in the chat box. And also, by the way, on all these links, they're all also included in the extra resources that you'll get when you get the follow-up resource page. So if you don't want to hold on to all of them today, don't worry about it. You'll get an email with all of it later. But if you want to read more about the difference between a CV versus a resume, there will be a link in the chat box. But what I can tell you is that in the US, a CV is generally much longer and lists out much more information about your educational history, maybe your publications, your presentations. It's much more detailed, and it's usually only required in academia or the legal professions or medical professions. A resume is a very short, usually 1-pager, 2 pages max, document that just shows your overall qualifications and skills and a little bit about your work history, and is usually customized or tailored to the job that you're applying for. So you're going to highlight work history that most matches the job you're applying for. The problem is that outside of the US, these words are often used interchangeably. And so a student may call their resume a CV when it's actually a resume, and they may write that on the top, and we don't want them to do that. We just want to teach them, here's the English vocabulary word for here, it's resume. Of all the students I've worked with on resume writing, I've only had 2 students who were from Latin America and really were in academia, and they were in my ESL classes to improve their English, and they needed CVs. Everybody else just needed a resume. And then lastly, personality traits. Students are often taught outside of the US to include things like hardworking, intelligent, generous, or different kinds of personality traits. We don't generally include those on resumes in the US, and so it's more common to include specific skills that you have, and so you want to make sure that they know these things. And there's a great article that it's actually a research publication that looks at the differences between what students are taught and they believe about resumes if they come from Mexico or if they are in America. And it's an easy read, and I encourage you to take a look at that, especially if you work with a lot of students from Mexico. All right, we're going to go on now. We've talked a little bit about learner differences or learner needs, but now we're going to jump into some instructional ideas. So I want to preface this by saying there are a lot of resources online for teaching resume writing, and there are even complete lesson plans and worksheets and different things. And I'm going to provide like a couple of ones that I think are really good in the follow-up resources. And one of those, Danielle's going to put a link to in the chat box right now. What we're going to talk about today is not like the step-by-step lesson plan, but more how you can provide creative and scaffolded instruction. So particularly, when I'm teaching writing resumes, I don't start out right away with like, you've come into my class, we've done no pre-work on this, and today we're going to do from start to finish, write a resume. I start with like scaffolding that instruction and building it over many weeks. It might be like a 5 to 10 minute part of a lesson, and I do a little more each lesson until we get to the point of writing a full resume. I also keep it really simple. So I don't want to give them too many options for styles or formats, because going back to that whole idea of perfect being the enemy of good, we don't want to overwhelm them with all of that. And at the beginning, that can feel really overwhelming. It can feel overwhelming for me too. So instead, I start with just one style or one format, like a chronological, let's say, maybe that's the one I'm going to choose. And I choose one template that all my students are going to use, and I just keep it really simple. Also, I do some exploration work with them ahead of the actual resume writing, where I might visit Career One Stop or ONET to explore skills and tasks typical of specific jobs that my students have held in the past, that helps build up that vocabulary and the phrases where they can write about the jobs that they've had on their resumes. So my last webinar with Pro Literacy covered Career One Stop and ONET, and I really would encourage you to go back and watch that, because I think it has a lot of important pre-work that you could do with your students prior to getting to resume writing. But let's just take a look at one example in ONET. So let's imagine you've got a class full of GED students, and they have worked, several of them have worked as cashiers somewhere, like cashiers in fast food or at a supermarket. So I've got ONET, the job cashier on ONET. So all I did was up here, like you see occupation keyword search, I searched for cashier. And here you can see some of the tasks that cashiers do. So this gives your students the language to start writing about what they did. Now, you wouldn't want them, if they didn't do one of these tasks, you don't want them to put it on their resume, but you have them look at it and explore it and say, which ones of these did you do? Jot those down. And then later, if it's a job that they're no longer in, you might teach them that they need to change that verb to past tense because they're no longer in the job, present tense as it is written here if they are in the job. But you've given them that beginning way to start phrasing and having the vocabulary to describe what they've actually done at their jobs. Another thing is that I might use a resume planning worksheet to guide students through initial brainstorming. And there are many of these online, but I'll just show you one that will also be shared with you. So here is a resume worksheet from Workforce Atlas, which is another resource we looked at in my last webinar. And I'm not on the first page of it, it's multiple pages, but you have them just start writing down some of their details. We're not talking today about writing the professional summary. That's like something that can be at the top of a resume. But if you come to a coaching session, we may discuss more professional summary or objective and how you write those. But you have them start listing out what are their qualifications. That could be their educational background, that could be certifications that they've gotten, that could be skills that they hold. And then you have them start working through their job history and listing all of that out. And then even looking at unpaid or volunteer jobs, because that's really important, especially if we have learners who just haven't established that much of a work history yet. They could still write about different things that they've done at school, where they maybe were on a committee, or they were in some sort of organization, or they did some sort of volunteer work. Anything, just have them brainstorm it all, and then going through their education. So these worksheets can be really helpful to start kind of building up what's going to be actually in the resume once they start writing it. All right, let's talk about a few other approaches. So these are some noticing activities I like to do that help my students build awareness of different things that go into a resume. So one thing I might do is I might print out a fake resume from online. You can easily just type in a Google search, resume example, daycare worker, for example, and you'll find some fake resumes. So print one out, make copies, one for each student, and then cut up each copy into strips so that it's sections, like the education section, the work section, the personal information, not personal details, but like at least name, phone number, email address. Those major sections. Give the strips to each student, has one packet of strips for one resume, and ask them to put the sections in order. So they're starting to kind of think about how do they order a resume by getting to do this manipulating task with their hands. Another idea is to create a resume with errors, or you might be able to find a resume with errors online, and give one to each student. And remember that highlights magazine in the dentist office when we were kids that had like you're spotting the differences? Have them spot the errors. So it could be spelling errors, punctuation errors, errors of organization, errors where like the bullet points aren't unified. You know, each one starts with a past tense verb and different things like that. And, you know, give them a target of, can you find 15 errors? And then can you repair or correct those errors? And it's raising their awareness of things that they need to do well when they write their own resumes. Another idea is to create an activity in which students match job descriptions with resumes. Again, you're wanting to build that awareness that their resume should be targeted towards the specific job they're applying for. So this is one way you could use generative AI, and I'm going to show you an example. I asked ChatGPT, and Danielle will give you this link so you can look at it. I wrote in here, I'm teaching students to write resumes. I want to create an activity in which they match fake job descriptions with fake resumes. Can you provide me one example with this? So here is what ChatGPT gave me. It gave me a fake job description for a marketing coordinator, and then it gave me the fake resume. So I could ask ChatGPT to create like a set of these, like say 5, and then I give them each student the 5 resumes and the 5 job descriptions, and they have to match them, building awareness that their resume should be customized. All right, so we've talked about some scaffolded instructional ideas. And now I want to look at a couple of free online resources that I really like, and I think you will too. And the first one is called Adult Ed Med, and this is a set of contextualized video lessons. And some of the people who created those are on this call today, so shout out to Ashley and Lori and anybody else who is here. But these are awesome lessons that are kind of like the full package for you if you want to use it that way. Let's go ahead and take a quick look at the Adult Ed Med website. So I'm on the Adult Ed Med site on the page where they have their work and technology lessons, and you can see they have a bunch of different topics. I've used many of these, but we're going to go down to how to write a resume. So with how to write a resume, you have videos that are full lessons of someone teaching how to write a resume, and there's the video in English. It's also available in Spanish. There's also a set of student resources and a set of teacher resources. So you could give the students the student resources, but I want to quickly look at the teacher resources. So within the teacher resources, you have a whole lesson plan that you could follow yourself that goes along with the video and the student resources. And then you have the PowerPoint or the Google Slides that you can use to show to your students. So I've done this. I've shown these slides to my students, and then we might pause at times to watch some of the video. And then there's the PowerPoint also in Spanish. You've got access to those videos. And then these are the resources that are also available for the students. So there's a template available for them to use that's in Google Docs already. And then there's samples of different kinds of resumes. Now I want to go back real fast to the opening page here. Each of the lessons within Adult Ed Med follows a different fictional adult learners who might match in a lot of ways your learners. So for the work and technology lessons, I think they all follow Krista. You're looking at her right now. She is a fictional learner from Ethiopia, and she's trying to figure out how to get a job at this hospital called Adult Ed Med in the United States. And so I really like how relatable it is for the students, and I really encourage you all to check it out, not just the one about resume writing, but also the other lessons that they have that apply to helping students get a job. And instead of going back to my PowerPoint, I'm just going to go ahead and show you the other resource that I really like. And this is called Google Applied Digital Skills. You do need to have a Google account to fully use this. But if you go under Browse Curriculum and you just type in resume and click on adult learners, then you can find Start a Resume. And I'm going to click on Start a Resume. And I want to scroll down here so that you can see that there are 10 sections under Start a Resume. And the first 8 have short videos that your students can watch that walks them through how to write a good resume using Google Doc templates. So this is a great resource that's building your students' resume writing skills and their digital skills at the same time. It starts right off from setting up a Google account and looking at your Google Drive and having Google folders. So you're building some of those real essential skills. I'm going to show you one more thing. So I pressed play to start it, and I want to show you that you can toggle between English and Spanish. So again, for those of us who work with a lot of Spanish language learners, that is a great option. You can also toggle between the playback speed of slow, normal, and fast. Also a great option if you need to slow it down a little bit. So the way I would use this is I would make sure each of my students know how to sign in to this and that they are able to use it on their own. I would start this by demoing it on a big screen in front of my class, and then having each of my students try to get signed in either in a computer lab or on their phone, and then giving them scaffolded steps to do. So maybe say, okay, in class today, we're all going to do number 1, and as homework, you're going to do number 2, and we're going to come back and talk about it in the next class. But you can find different ways that work for you for scaffolding that instruction and using this with your learners. Okay, so we've talked about our learners' needs. We've talked about different scaffolded instructional approaches. We've talked about these online resources of Adult Ed Med and Google Applied Digital Skills. And I want to finish up by talking about how we might leverage generative AI with our learners. And I do see a lot of things coming through the chat box, so I'm just going to do a quick look. It looks like most of these are about those links, so that's great. All right, so as we talk about generative AI, there's a few caveats that I want to say before I get to kind of the next 2 slides. First of all, there are AI resources out there that are specific for resume writing. Most of those are paid, And I'm not recommending that you necessarily use those in class with your learners. I don't love to bring in paid things that my learners have to pay for, or that I have to pay for in class. There's a lot of great ways that you could use what's free with your learners. The other thing is that ChatGPT can have some pitfalls, and we're going to look at that on the next page. But my recommendation is, if you are going to teach your learners to use ChatGPT or any other generative AI tool, at my workplace, we're using Bing Copilot. I would do that with a lot of walking alongside them and guiding them, especially in the early stages, because your learners, going back to one of those first learner needs that we talked about, is that many of them have never seen a good example of a resume. ChatGPT can sometimes be over the top. It can spit out some output that is like great for marketing and ads, but maybe doesn't sound very realistic, or the tone or the voice is like just too much, and doesn't sound like your learner at all. But if your learner doesn't have a lot of experience with resumes in the first place, they may not recognize that. So you want to really walk alongside them if you're going to have them use this. And I would mainly use it for wording about non-traditional experiences. Like if they have an unpaid work experience and they're trying to think through, how do I talk about this in a way that highlights some skills I might have picked up there? I might teach them to use it for editing or proofreading, or for some examples, but it's not a substitute for, it's just a supplement to the skills that you need to teach your students. Okay, so that said, let's launch first into the pitfalls. First of all, I mentioned this, voice and tone mistakes. So I've used ChatGPT a lot to write copy for me for different things. Usually, almost always, I don't take word for word and copy and paste whatever ChatGPT comes up with. And one of the main reasons is that the adjectives that ChatGPT tends to use are really over the top. And so I have to say, hey, this adjective, and you can say this to ChatGPT. That's one of the wonderful things about it. I can say, hey, this adjective you wrote right here, it's over the top. Can you write it in a more toned down way? And then it'll do it for me. But like sometimes I have to really massage it before it gets to something that I'm like, oh, that's brilliant. I can use that. So you really want to make sure your students are aware that it needs to sound like something that they really would say. Another thing is that ChatGPT will create falsehoods. So if you say, if a learner says, I was a cashier, create a list of bullet pointed activities that I would have done at my job so that I can put on my resume, it may say a bunch of things that your learner didn't actually do. And so your learner needs to know that and know, like, I need to look through that and think which of those things actually are true about me. Sometimes it is clear that ChatGPT was used for the majority of the resume. And going back to the 200 plus resumes that I've reviewed in the last couple of years, over the past year, that is becoming more and more common as I'm reviewing resumes and cover letters, that ChatGPT was used for a majority of it. As a person who's been hiring, or I work with a fellowship program and I select fellows who will receive a scholarship. As I'm doing that and reviewing resumes, if I sense there's a little bit of ChatGPT use, that's not a major red flag for me. But if it's clear that they've used it for the majority of the resume, that's a big red flag, because then I don't get a real good sense of who the person really is. One way that it's clear is that there's strange formatting that ChatGPT does. And if you just do a direct copy and paste, then sometimes there's this clear gray box around the output that's really hard to get rid of. And so I know, like when I see that, oh, that came from ChatGPT. Another thing is ChatGPT changes bullet points to little asterisks. So if I see a whole list of asterisks, that's a hard word to say as a plural, then I know that that's probably from ChatGPT. The other thing is ChatGPT just really likes bullet points. So if like everything, especially like if we're talking about other writing, not just resumes, if everything is bullet pointed, then I start wondering. And then again, those voice and tone mistakes, if it's like really over the top in terms of adjective use or the way it's describing things, I might start to question it. And then the last thing, and this is an important one, is privacy and data security. So it is a large language model that is continually learning from the data that we input to it. So nothing is personal or private or secure if we put it into ChatGPT. Now, that's one of the reasons I use Bing Copilot is I have a protected Bing Copilot account through my work at Texas A&M, and so there's an extra layer of data security. But this is overall a topic that we need to be talking with our students about more and more in so many areas, not just with the use of generative AI, but you don't want your learner to put in all their personal information like their name, phone number, and email and stuff. So I wouldn't have them upload their entire resume into ChatGPT if they're asking for proofreading help. I would just have it you do sections. We're going to talk about that on the next slide. So with all of those pitfalls or things to be aware of, what are some ways that we can use ChatGPT effectively? First of all, you could have ChatGPT analyze a job description, a real job description that you find online, and suggest relevant keywords and skills to highlight in a resume. And I have an example of that. So let's go take a look at that. So I wrote, analyze this job description and suggest relevant keywords and skills that I should highlight in my resume. And then I just copied and pasted a job description about a writing center coordinator, because that's like something that perhaps like I might be interested in some future life. And so I put the whole thing in here. And then down here, ChatGPT gave me some keywords that it pulled out of there that I might want to use in my own resume if they are true about me. If I have any experience with any of these things, I might want to highlight those. It gives me some skills that I might want to highlight on my resume if they are true about me. Also some abilities. And then I gave it a little extra information about myself of a writing instructor job I had overseas and asked it to kind of match what might be typical in that role with this job description. And so it gave me some ideas of bullet points from that job when I was a writing instructor overseas. And I can look through those and think, are any of those true? And if they are, maybe I'll include them. All right. So that's one idea of something you could do with your students or teach your students to do. Another is you could just ask it to provide what are typical bullet points for, and then a common job. I think going back to ONET is the best way to find that, but you might also have them compare what they find on ONET and what ChatGPT comes up with. And you could do a lot of different fun, creative activities with that comparison. You could also have it suggest bullet points for volunteer or non-paid experiences. So you could say like, I helped organize this event with my family, like a family reunion. Can you give me some bullet points that I could include on my resume that highlight skills or things that I would have done in that? I'm just throwing out a random example. And the big thing is you could have it correct your spelling and grammar. And that's something that I really would love for you to encourage your students to use it for, because Grammarly isn't free, but ChatGPT 3 is, or 3.5. And then the last thing is you could put the job description in and then put in the non-personal details part of your resume and ask it to suggest updates to the resume to better match the job description. So these are different things you could do with your students. Again, I would really want you to walk your students through this carefully to make sure that you're staying aware of those different kinds of pitfalls that we talked about on the previous slide. All right, we are nearing the end where I'll be able to take some questions. And before we get to that, I just want to say your feedback really matters to us. So I would ask that you would take a moment to open up this survey and give us some feedback from today's webinar. We use this feedback to bring you higher quality and even better things in the future. And so it informs a lot, and we want to make sure you have time to fill that out. So I'm going to pause for just a moment so that you can scan that QR code. And I see while I'm waiting that Lakeisha said that Grammarly does have a free version. That's good to know. I'm reading back through some of these. Okay, let me go on to the next slide. So if you have some remaining questions, and I'm looking back through the questions that are in the chat box, please, if you would open the Q&A box at the bottom of your toolbar, that's a great place for you to put those questions. So any remaining questions that you would like me to answer, and I can stay around. I mean, we've still got about 7 minutes left, but I can stay around for a few minutes after anyway. Please write those in the Q&A section that you'll see in your Zoom toolbar at the bottom. In the chat box, what I'd really love to know is what is one takeaway that you're excited about from this that you want to go back and try out and experiment with? Write that in the chat box and write your questions in the Q&A, and we'll try to address those. Okay, I can see that Kate Herzog, and hi, Kate, we've worked together on some things in the past. She likes Occupational Information Network, and she put the link to that in the chat box. That looks like a great resource that I'm going to check out as well. And Ashley Winkle said Bard likes bullet points too. So maybe that's just a generative AI thing, that it just generates a lot of bullet points. Bullet points can be good, but when it's like overdone, then it could cause someone to start wondering, was this all generated by AI and not the person? Jean put, could you go the other way? Input a job description and decide on keywords that could be included in the resume. I'm not sure, Jean, I thought that that's what I showed. So maybe you can clarify that, because I would really love to answer that question. And Chandara put, do you have any suggestions of service providers for online keyboarding and typing certification? I don't, but Elizabeth Bohan, hi Elizabeth, it's good to see you here. She typed that she likes GFC typing. And so maybe, I don't know, Elizabeth, if they provide any kind of certification, that would be good to know. Access to the slideshow. Danielle says yes. That will be in the follow-up resources that you get at the end. You'll also get all the links that we've talked about today in one document that you can save. Lakeisha's excited about using ChatGPT to create some of the resume sample activities. Yeah, I haven't gotten to do that as much as I would want to, because I haven't taught as much since ChatGPT came out. And so I'm looking forward to doing it more and refining what works and getting even more creative. And Liz, yeah, chunking apart the resume lesson is such a good idea. In my course, I kind of built that up. We did work that led up to it over about 4 weeks, where we were meeting twice a week. So, and I didn't say this is a chunk for the resume lesson, but like we would be working on vocabulary or understanding our skill set or different things like that. And I would always say, make sure you're keeping notes on this vocabulary, or you're writing these down, or you're saving this, because this will be really good in the future when we get to the resume.
Michelle, we do have some questions that have come into the Q&A now as
Great.
well. So Jean says a lot of times the resumes aren't posted as actually as resumes, but they input the information in different sections. So I'm thinking probably like online resumes in particular, where you're working on a section at a time. She says that can be complicated for an English language learner. Do you have any suggestions for that?
Yeah, that is great, Jean. The thing that comes to mind immediately is to create a Google form that is similar to that. So you might have like a question on the Google form that would be similar to what is in the first section where you input a section online of your resume. And I think my current job that's how it was, that I inputted the different sections online. So you could create a Google form so that they get practice, and even teaching them like how to copy and paste from, like, let's say they have a saved resume in a Google Doc or a Word document, and how like just that simple Control C or Control V skill of copying and pasting is a great digital skill that you could teach students to do, while you're also teaching them how to use a Google form to practice submitting an online resume section by section. Should the resume be written on any particular type of paper? Well, these days, almost all resumes are submitted online. So I'm going to say that's not as important these days. I can't remember the last time I had to print out and hand carry in a resume, but and mostly I teach my students about applying for jobs online as well, because a lot of them don't have that skill of how to search for a job online, apply for a job online, submit all their paperwork online. But if you were going to print it out, I think the main thing would be that it is not on colored paper, and that it is your standard 8x11 size. Pablo says how to tailor a resume to try to get promoted to a higher role for a company you already work for. That is a really interesting question, Pablo. And I think that depends job by job and company by company, whether or not you even have to do that. But I think like I know in my current job, there's like a career track, and what I have to be able to do to move up is to show that in so many ways I'm already doing the things that are on the next level. So it's more about like what I'm actually doing in my job and less about what's on paper. But then I would want to take that and transfer what I'm doing that shows I'm already doing some of those things that are at that higher role, and then put it in my resume under my current role. And so first do, and then show it by putting it on your resume. And then maybe if you come to one of the coaching sessions, we might brainstorm that a little bit more. And then Dayanira says, coaching sessions, they are going to be all different, because it really depends on the questions that the individuals who attend that session brings, or the things that they really want to talk about. So you really could come to multiple ones. I'm not coming with something prepared that I'm going to teach you. I'm coming prepared to like brainstorm answers to the questions you bring in the moment. And so it's going to be very spontaneous. And if you come and say, I just want to know more about the resources, then I may go back over some of the things from today and ask, like, which ones of these do you want to dive into more? Or maybe we'll practice one of the things from today. So please feel free to do the one that works for your time, since you're not available for every single one of those times that is listed. All right, I think I got all the Q&A. I'm looking forward to seeing many of you in upcoming coaching sessions. And I hope you'll also come to the last webinar that I'll be doing in April, which is about communication at work and different kinds of situations we might be in where we need some kind of upgraded communication skills and how we teach those to our learners. I do see one more question from Benjamin. It says, I've read too many resumes with pages of hype. Say money that they save the company. Do you have your students avoid this style of writing? That's a really good question, Benjamin. I do teach that if you can give your students things that they can write that's quantifiable, many hiring managers are looking for that, but it needs to read as real and authentic. So, for example, on my resume, it says what percentage increase we saw in students at a English center that I was working at that was a for-profit center once I took over the customer service aspect at that center. And so it's quantifiable, and I want to put that on my resume so that people can see like there was a result of something that I did. And a lot of resume writing guidelines say that you should have things that are quantifiable. I don't always focus as strongly with my students on that because it's like a more advanced skill, and a lot of my students just need the basics. Again, going back to that perfect is the enemy of done or good. I'm wanting to give them the basics, but if I see like they've got the basics, then I might go more into like, how can you write quantifiable results and the bullet points under your jobs without it being hype. All right. I think that was the last question. So thank you all so much today. It's been great to have you here with me, and I hope you all have a great day, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the coaching sessions.